Hi, welcome to the 3V POV podcast. We are three Virgos, and this is our point of view on all things astrology, the supernatural, and everything spiritual. Hey, I'm here with Kelly and Diana. We used to be, by the way, the Indigo Bone podcast. We changed our name. We also changed our format because we're going to have guests on. And our first guest today is going to be Jeff. He's Saddle Suit Atelier on Threads, and he's gonna talk about how to protect yourself spiritually.
Mm.
So I'm just gonna kick it off to Diana. Let's start with the astrology portion of our podcast.
Well, thank you, Saida. So the reason why we wanted to get together when we were kikiing a couple weeks ago, we talked about having this episode with a focus on Jupiter and what Jupiter is doing in the sky right now. So Jupiter, which represents our beliefs, law, expansion, okay, it's stationed direct on March 10th. And so for months, we have been experiencing the retrograde version of Jupiter. We have been going inward. We have been reviewing things related to our belief systems, related to what is expanding or what isn't expanding in our lives. So we've had things to review. Now that Jupiter is direct, we are applying the learnings that we've had from that review. And Jupiter's expression will start to feel more external. We'll start to see outside of us how Jupiter is working in the Cancer part of our lives, which
Mhm.
correlates to where we have Cancer in our charts. The Cancer expression, when Jupiter is expressing in the sign of Cancer, we are often see themes related to our sense of home, belonging, family,
Mhm.
intuition, safety, ancestry, and memory. What's also interesting is that now that Jupiter is direct expressing these Cancerian themes, it's hosting a lot of planets that are currently in Jupiter's territory of Pisces, including Mars, which is the planet of our action, will, drive, and assertion. And when Mars is in Pisces, Mars moves on its sense of feeling, intuition. Mars in Pisces tends to like to cross borders. So there's a lot going on around Mars in Pisces moves on how we feel. And we're all
Mhm.
really sensitive right now. A lot of us have been feeling overwhelmed. We've been feeling the expression of water, big feelings, and we also want to comfort ourselves a lot with that expression. So then the other planet I'll mention briefly is that Mercury is also in Pisces right now. Mercury governs how we communicate and how we think. In Pisces, Mercury's expression is nonlinear. It's not very direct. I've stumbled over lots of errors and things that I've been working on, but that's okay because when Mercury is in Pisces, we are supposed to go with the flow, whatever the
Mhm.
flow means for each of us. So it has been a Mercury that is also operating in a sense on how we feel, discernment, and intuition. So, with that being said, it's interesting that Mars, okay, so Mars is in Jupiter's territory. Jupiter is now direct, blowing things up, expanding things for all of us. Mars in Pisces is hosting two outer planets who recently moved out of that Pisces territory and now are in Aries. So,
Mhm.
we've got Saturn, a biggie, okay, and Neptune, a biggie. When these planets move, we sense things not just on our day to day lives, but also in the overall larger collective. So Saturn forms and crystallizes things. It also feels like when Saturn shows up in our charts, we often feel limitation. Kelly, when you were talking, you described it as feeling like the walls closing in. when Saturn is present. That's what we tend to feel. It's also associated with where we have responsibilities that we got to take care of, business that we just can't avoid in our lives. It's also associated with decay and death. Saturn rules time in astrology. So Saturn is forming and crystallizing things right now. Neptune, which governs things that are timeless, gas, dreams, illusion, it's often tied to spirituality. The two planets are both sitting in Mars's territory, while Mars is in Pisces. Are you seeing the drift that I'm going on real quick? I'm going to tie this together so we can get into what's next. So when Saturn and Neptune get together historically, these are big time periods in our lives that are associated with a breaking down of walls, okay? A breaking of illusions. At the same time, when these two planets get together, they are in essence creating new realities for each of us. So I've been saying we need to be careful about what realities we're creating for ourselves, because whatever becomes the dominant narrative, so to speak, at this time can become what forms via the principle of Saturn and Neptune coming together and crystallizing the ideas that are generating right now in Aries. Okay. So what we're seeing happen now is we're seeing major changes happening. We are seeing the Aries expression via Saturn and Neptune. Aries expresses as new, impulsive, assertive, competitive, martial. Sometimes Aries is violent. All right. And it also rules the head in astrology. So as it plays out, it's playing out in several ways, but one way it's playing out is that it's showing up consistently from what I've seen around the ideas of the head or ideologies and the ways that we think about our reality. So what we're creating now, in a sense, the way I'm seeing it, is that what we're creating now becomes our mainstream. It becomes our reality. So I'm curious, I wanted to pivot now to talking about briefly how it's showing up for each of us, because we all have Virgo moons. And Virgo's expression is very powerful at being able to see the details of our day-to-day mundane lives. So I'm curious to hear how any of these themes around a battle for what we believe. We're thinking about Mars in Pisces, the sign of expression of Pisces, which I skipped over because I was so excited to get through my grounded notes, is about the liminal, the spiritual. So there's this theme like Mars is fighting for belief, or Mars is trying to operate on feeling right now, and wants to just go based on, it's like, what's the pull for Mars right now? It's where Mars's feet want to go. But there's also this idea, because there's these two big giant planets in Aries crystallizing ideas around the head. It's what are the ideas that we're forming in our heads about ourselves as part of this new beginning, new reality? Okay, big season, new Aries ingress happening on Sunday. Sorry, not Sunday, Friday. The Aries ingress is happening on Friday. Okay. And that's when the sun moves into Aries. And when the sun moves into Aries, we're going to start to see, like, in our faces, we're going to be very aware of what these new realities are looking like for each of us. All right. So what's happening in our universes? I've been seeing a lot of discussion around people's ideas being better than others. I mean, how literal is that, right? Like, Aries is like, my stuff is better than your stuff. What are you gonna do about it? What about you guys?
Kelly, you want to go ahead or?
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's kind of really personal for me what's been happening, and I am also seeing the collective picture. But I'm just thinking back. So when we originally talked about doing this episode, one of the things that we were going to highlight is how to work with Jupiter. We've had Jupiter in Cancer since last summer. early last summer, and Jupiter was direct for a while in Cancer, and then for about 5 months has been, or 4 months has been retrograde, turned direct again just recently on the 10th of March. And so, how has that been for us? And for me personally, because I have Jupiter in Pisces, um, in my seventh house. So it's, a domicile Jupiter. It's the strongest planet in my chart as far as from a beneficial standpoint. And I've spent a lot of time kind of focused on how do I work with this benefic planet. A lot of it is, the conversation in my life for years, but also recently has been around faith and believing and seeing miracles happen and being sustained by my faith, as opposed to looking to maybe like more tangible 3D reality types of things. And then as I lean into that energy, watching how that is able to flow better in my life. And so what's interesting is that there's kind of been an ease with it, even when Jupiter was retrograde in Cancer. I've still just kind of been experiencing this flow. When Saturn moved into Aries in February 14, it ingressed into Aries. I didn't notice like an immediate shift, and all of us were like, get out of Pisces, because it's been in Pisces for 2.5 years. And of course, I was looking forward to not having that experience of that limitation in an angular house anymore. And it had aspected all of my Cancer planets. So there'd been all of that going on by trine, though. So it was a little bit different than what's happening now. Anyway, I noticed it about 10 days ago that I started to struggle with my faith. And I started to struggle with my beliefs. And I started to see the glass as half empty instead of half full. And nothing circumstantially is really too much different for me than it has been in the last few years, and especially even in the last year. I'm actually in a Jupiter perfection year. So, which is a way of kind of seeing what's going to happen in your year ahead by looking at, who the time Lord is. And so I'm in a Jupiter year, which has been another emphasis for Jupiter for me. It was also the ascendant ruler in my solar return chart. So just a lot of Jupiter going on. And then Jupiter being in Cancer has emphasized Jupiter for all of us because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, right? So anyway, I had been doing this practice where I was kind of doing readings for complimentary readings on Threads on Thursdays. I would always light my Jupiter candle, my purple candle. And I would see, I had already been seeing miraculous intervention and amazing things, and my faith was just in a great place. And then, I was thinking about the guy on TikTok, and then there was this shift. And so about 10 days ago, and I knew that I was coming into a time when Saturn in Aries was going to aspect Saturn in Cancer, which is my natal placement, and was going to square it, which is like a kind of a big moment in the Saturn cycle of our lives. We get two squares in opposition, and then we have the two Saturn returns. And so I'm on my final square before my second Saturn return. And I knew it was kind of loading, but I was so distracted by all this stuff happening in Pisces, and also just had been in such a great place. And then I began to experience this war that you're talking about, this internal battle with what do I really believe about myself, which is, Aries, right? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my resources? Because I'm dealing with it in the eighth house. Is the universe really supporting me? Like, it wasn't a question mark 3 weeks ago, and I was so excited about Jupiter turning direct, but I wasn't, thinking about the fact that at the same time as Jupiter's turning direct, Saturn is closing in on my natal Saturn and also opposing my natal Pluto. So this has really become a matter of this kind of tug of war that I'm dealing with between this Jupiter, this my faith, my beliefs. How do I take action? We've got the Mars piece there, and then this Saturn, this limitation, this feeling of I'm hitting a wall, but also how do I look at that energy in a not in a positive, negative way, but how do I leverage that Saturn energy, which is, leaning into discipline, leaning into study, leaning into what am I mastering in this eighth house as opposed to just, the first feeling of Saturn. A lot of times when you first feel that energy as it's, aspecting something, it's terrifying. It's scary. It feels like, you know, it symbolizes the end of, it was the last planet for the longest time before the outer planets were discovered. And so it's like, it's the gateway to death. And you used a word that came to me yesterday, and I didn't really want to embrace it, but I knew that was the answer. I was like, how am I going to get through this Saturn square and this Pluto opposition? How do I get through this? And I'm telling you that the way through is exactly what you said, the word you said: surrender. Surrender. Because when we, that is the pathway of faith. That is the pathway of faith. It's the same energy. How do we work with Jupiter? We surrender to the invisible. We surrender to faith. We surrender to what we cannot see. We hold the hand of the unseen benefic, right? How do we surrender in working with Saturn? We say, okay, what are you here to teach me? Because you didn't come just to kill me, although it feels like that at times. Same with Pluto. You came to teach me something. And that's one of the things we want to focus on today is, as we have Saturn and Neptune together in this Aries house, what do we need to learn? And you hit the nail on the head with that too, about spiritual protection. One of the sessions that we had quite a while ago, the three of us, where we were kind of diving in with some guided meditation. And we were talking about Neptune moving into Aries and how was that going to look for us? Because for Saida and I, it's our 8th house. For Diana, it's your 11th house. But how is it going to look for us, Neptune moving into Aries? We want to move more into maybe things to do with mediumship, connecting more with our, ancestors who, have passed away. A lot of different maybe spiritual practices and spiritual experiences that we've sort of maybe flirted with or had in childhood. We talked about some things that happened to us in childhood, right? But now we're going to move more into it and really start to dive in a deeper way. How do we do this safely, without fear, but with reverence for walking through those spaces? And one of the things, we've all had these encounters with Jeff Teneo, Saddle Sud Atelier, on Threads and Instagram and things, where we've seen him talking about the astral realm, and we've heard him talking about, he's a mage, so we've heard him talking about working with magic, working with spells, working with sigils. And you don't just go diving head first. We've been reading, some of us have been reading the Picatrix, which is this ancient book of astrology magic. You don't just go playing around with the planets and with magic and with whatever type of magic you're doing, but you move with reverence, without fear. And that's where we want to be. And we want to be in that place of understanding, how do we better proceed so that we don't get, sidewinded by, Neptune can be deceptive. Neptune can be, drag us into some place that we don't want to be. It's associated with addiction. It's associated with a lot of negative things. But that higher mind, that higher level, is wanting to open up a new vista for us, that's connected to identity, and it's connected to this Aries energy. So I'm excited, and I am fighting. I don't want to surrender, but this is what we've got to do. So, but I was noticing too what you were saying, Diana, and I think Saida maybe have seen this too, where there's just a lot of like quibbling back and forth between spiritual practitioners about who's right, what's, and it just seems to have gotten a lot more intense. I mean, what's happened through the years, right? We know this through centuries, but lately it's just been like every time I see an astrology thread, I'm going, can we all just agree to disagree? Maybe not. Anyway, so that's my POV.
Girl, I don't pay attention to other people. I'm an Aquarius.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I did have like somebody, I don't know if it was, so I responded to a thread of somebody talking about equal houses. And then I gave my point of view about Placidus and whole signs, and then I used them together because I have a 29-degree ascendant. So for me, things change a lot with the different systems. And then that guy, he blocked me.
Oh, wow.
Like, what happened? Why did he block me? And then
Oh, wow.
my it looked like my response was just like a post on my page, and then somebody else responded to me, and I don't know, they were like uh, objecting to to what I was saying about Placidus or whole sign houses. I don't know, but
Hmm.
yeah. So I've actually I was thinking like I didn't see any of these quibbles, but I'm
You were
actually
in one.
I was in one and I didn't know.
Threads is a very good like a macro, like for me with it's a way to see how the larger collective themes are playing out. So for example, there was some person who had posted that African Americans who were worshiping Orishas, the Nigerian spiritual practices were basically walking, I could only assume make assumptions about what he was going for. But, there's a lot of fighting over like whose practices belong to who. And so this idea that what's interesting, I'm jumping a little bit because I want us to get ready for Jeff, but there's an interesting connection, which I will not go into the technical difficulties of between Aries and Virgo. Okay. And I've been testing it out. It is a hidden connection that you don't readily see from looking at the
Oh,
chart. And so, what's
yeah,
so
for sure.
interesting is I've been deducing that, with all this pressure or tension around our heads and our ideas, and the fact that we're trying to protect our autonomy, Aries, protect
Mm,
our individuality when there's so much battleship over belief systems and who's right, who's wrong. Virgo is a key here because Virgo, as these planets continue moving through Aries, they're making this connection with planets and points in Virgo. And I said, we need to really be engaged in practices that support our bodies, that ground us, that keep us calm. Okay. So if we're sourcing from Jupiter, it's prayer, it's belief, it's optimism, right? Jupiter in Cancer wants to fight over ancestral practices, but maybe Jupiter in Cancer is tapping into the ability to get into ancestral practices, which is why I'm so excited to be talking to Jeff soon. It could
yeah.
also be an increase on somatics being very popular. Wellness is popping, and I think it's going to become even more important as we see themes that play out from, we didn't talk about the South Node in Virgo, but I'm just generally seeing that it's like as things get heated in Aries, watch for an emphasis on more Virgo, wellness of the mind and body as a wonderful way of energy working. So, Reiki practitioners, the people who do acupuncture, anyone who does sound bath healing, yoga,
Yeah.
anything that connects us to the trees, puts our toes in the grass, and helps us to ground back in the body, I think are going to be really potent practices coming up. They already are, but I think more people are going to be
Yeah.
recognizing the need, especially when the healthcare system is, um, yeah, yes,
Yeah,
what it is
I,
right now. Okay.
that's really cool, and it's so hard to stay optimistic in this day and age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to be such an
Right.
optimistic person, and it's getting harder and harder. Like, if you see
Mm.
what's going on in the world.
It
Think
Yeah.
really is.
about
And
it.
that's one of the things. So I know that what I'm dealing with is on a personal level, but also we cannot, we're all connected. And what's been happening globally, especially since the end of February, is super impactful. One of the things we were talking about is how there's been Mars in Pisces has been invisible. It's been hidden behind the sun. And on the 17th, which was yesterday, the Mars experienced its heliacal rise. And so what that means is that it became visible again after numerous weeks, I think maybe 6 weeks or more of being
Yeah.
invisible. And so it's back at the forefront. Some people would ask the question, is it better to have a Mars behind the scenes making moves, or better to have a visible Mars, making moves. Either way, Mars is going to make moves, and this is the thing, whether it's in Pisces, it's in Air, whatever sign Mars is in, it's going to make moves. Whatever sign Jupiter is in, it's going to expand. Whatever sign Saturn is in, it's going to teach us lessons, help us crystallize, and so on and so forth, right? So saw astrologer the other day, Asaf Reynolds, who is a pretty well-known astrologer and is on Threads now, talking about how more and more through the years he moved away from the signs, not completely, obviously, but how he relates more to the planets as their nature, and then the sign is the secondary layer, right? Or that we look at. But just looking at what Mars is doing, moving, and how it's moving and how that's impacting all of us in the world right now. And I think having two outer planets in Aries ruled by Mars is emphasizing that Martian energy, and is going to continue to emphasize it. It's 2.5 years with Saturn, or 2.5 to 3, and 14 years with Neptune. We're going to see a lot of Martian activity. And we've got to learn to lean into our faith, lean into our optimism, as you were saying. And it is hard. It is hard when you flip on the TV, flip on the news, flip through, social media, and you see what's happening in the world. And it's not a matter of not caring about, others, or not being concerned, or, that's not what Jupiter wants from us. In fact, Jupiter wants the opposite. Jupiter wants us to turn toward each other. Jupiter wants us to be, charitable. Jupiter wants us to reach out, as does Saturn. And really, I would say all of the planets emphasize that, charitable, being human, relating to each other, in those ways, to balance out what's happening. We are, that reflection in the world, and helping each other get through these difficult times and transits and what's happening, war wise and other things. So I think we are, Jeff is coming on in just a minute. So we're going to
Yeah, for sure. He's
pause.
already waiting. So
Okay, perfect.
We'll be right back. And we're back, and we're here with Jeff, who has joined us to talk about anything like magical and protection. So, Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here with you lovely ladies, especially on this fresh new lunation. We just made it out of eclipse season, right? So my name is Jeff, formerly known as Sarah Sood, at least online and socials. And my bread and butter is pretty much anything magical, esoteric, or mystic. I work mainly as a community leader here in Manhattan. Yeah, New Yorker at heart, and I try to bring that grit into the metaphysical, right? To support the community and really help to awaken that inner magic that we all have, right? Because we're all just part of this bigger ecosystem and this wondrous world. And so, I just hope my work is really focused on expanding that within the folks that I work with.
So where are you from
And
originally, or your family?
So my family is from the Dominican Republic. So I come from a long line of woo-woo relations, so to speak. Coming through, my African ancestry, even a little bit on the European side from what I've been able to trace, and then being in New York City and growing up here, the confluence of just so many different cultures and ways of thoughts and religions that really influenced me, and being someone that tries to see the absolute in that whole, creative reality in all the little reflections that we see in our day to day. And I think that's where the magic's found.
So you are like, I'm literally like sipping water and trying to ground my feet because I have so many questions, and I'm like, I'm going to like burst with like excitement talking to you. But what's so interesting, one of the things we were talking about with the astrology of the season is Jupiter being in Cancer, Jupiter being associated with our belief systems. And one meaning of that is that there's been an emphasis in the collective that we've seen in our day-to-day observations of folks wanting to get in touch with their ancestral practices. Like it, or like ancestral connections have been a big theme with Jupiter and Cancer. And so it's just so exciting because we're talking about how to tap into those connections And so I'm curious, were you always embracing your family's magic, or were you like like me when I was a kid? Because my family's from Haiti, like I'd be like side-eyeing some of the stuff I was seeing in the background. Like, how was it for you? And I mean, just okay, I'm gonna stop there.
First off, sac passe.
Capoulé.
Hey. So, the interesting thing, and where I feel actually especially like blessed, and maybe this is, me being a Jupiter ruled person, mostly Saturn ruled, but with Jupiter being my strongest planet, within my family,
Where's your Jupiter?
while Jupiter in Scorpio.
Okay.
13-degree Scorpio. Yeah, right there in my 11th house, whole sign. But when it comes to my family, interestingly enough, the metaphysical and these practices actually are just so intertwined with who I am.
Mhm.
So, in the Dominican Republic, we, much like in Haiti, I'm sure like the practices of like, having the local medicine woman or the comadrona as we call them. So often, the doulas were also the medicine women and also the seers and also the
Mhm.
astrologers and all these things encompassed in one. And they were just these very central pillars of the community, whether it's, advising them on day-to-day topics or literally saving lives, and so in my case, it's interesting because my grandmother, who's the matriarch of my family, and the one that really like, just took the initiative on things, she's always been a person that, while religious and she has her Bible, in her hand, not once have I ever seen her judge or what's the word? She's not a Bible thumper per se.
Mhm.
She's kind of like, and maybe this is where I get that magician's attitude of, taking what works and, throwing out the rest, where
Yeah.
she was a Jehovah's Witness, she was a Mormon, she's just always been seeking,
Mhm.
and that mentality also again affected my receptivity to spiritual thought and just different ways of moving about through this life and the meanings of it. And so when I was in the womb, actually, so there was a whole situation going on, and so long story short, my mother was actually afflicted by a curse. I
Mhm.
actually, for all intents and purposes, died in the womb.
Ooh.
I choked on my umbilical cord.
Mhm.
Huh?
And so, to find the solution, because, my heartbeat wasn't registering on, the ultrasound and things, my grandmother, of course, said, all right, we're going to DR. We're going to see Marita. May she rest in everlasting peace. One of these local medicine women.
Mhm.
And, long story short, it was a situation where, she gave a remedy. She said, listen, you're going to see a scary looking demon thing. The baby's going to finally move again. You just got to note the direction and come back. Lo and behold, spectacular Hollywood production, seeming vision or what have you. And she came back and she actually gave my mother prophecy regarding like, myself and who I'd become and everything. And to
Ooh.
this day, it's pretty much to the letter, like so it's interesting how, in spite of all the cultural, and I think this is something that we could speak to even with like Neptune, right? So Neptune being so vast and expansive,
Yeah.
the more ingredients we add to the soup, the more diluted said individual ingredient is going to get, right?
Sure.
So it's easy for it to get lost in the general flavor of this, right? And
Yeah.
so, with belief systems, and now, with Neptune and Saturn and Aries, easy segue there. I'm really seeing that, like how do beliefs, come together but still retain their essence, right? And I think with the nature of Aries, that's especially like a thing, like the essential meaning of things. Like that's how I see it. Like in occult circles, Aries really represents the power of consecration, right? The ability to make
Mhm.
things sacred. And when we
Mhm.
think about that, we kind of accept that as a reality. But what does that mean, right? It's saying like, hey, we're gonna use this spoon or this mantle for this specific purpose, and from now on its sacredness is unviolable, right? So with this being said, we think about Aries, the head, elementally speaking, fire, the place where the will occurs, that first spark, the will to do, the first, flame of the Big Bang. So how does belief then immediately translate into action, right? When we
Mhm.
think about the faculties that we have, our willpower, if it doesn't mean something to us, it's not gonna get done. We're not gonna will
Mars
to.
and Pisces right now. That's what we were talking about, right? Like if we're not feeling it, we ain't doing it, right? Yeah.
That's a fact. That's a fact. And
Hmm.
like I think that's where the dangers perhaps lie, but then also the opportunities. We have these two heavy hitters, these, a trans-Saturnine planet and then Saturn itself. And then Saturn, I see it as that scaffolding to upon which stories are actually formed.
Mm,
If we go from, the infinite expanse of nothingness and yet everything being possible at once, Saturn is the one that really, by the power of necessity, starts weaving things together. And then, all these different little
mm,
strands of meaning all of a sudden become the tapestry of our lives. But then being co-present and conjunct, Neptune, who has this power of erasing and kind of like returning things from the singular to the collective, there's going to be this tension between, I think, the meaning that we prescribe to things, like especially like looking at it in a religious sense. Like, do we harp on the concepts and the precepts that were the real intent behind a religion, let's say, or are we just gonna go with the zeitgeist and the movements of what's happening, in our physical day to day? Because we got a lot of religions
mm.
that say love, light, and peace, and yet the only light that we're seeing is coming from explosions or like
Yeah.
tiki torches like walking down the street. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I
it's
think
only
that's
that
that's
way
a
if
point.
you believe what we believe. You subscribe to our beliefs, we'll be nice to you. You're not doing it?
Yeah.
Yes, right?
Right,
And
right.
like we'll love you if you do what we say.
Thus erasing, so there's like this verticality again, going back to, thinking of fire and Aries being the crown at the top, vertical, CEO, hierarchy, tower, like that. Something that happens there is that, again, by aligning yourself to a structure, sure, you have the security and the protections of, aligning with that, but then that also means that the essential meaning of who you are is erased, or rather
Mm,
sacrificed for this pyramid, right?
Yeah,
mm,
you're blowing
It's
my mind right now. I was just thinking about the new moon in Pisces chart, and in DC, it's a Libra rising, which is
Mhm.
interesting because Libra is, and everything's in Libra. And then it's
Mhm.
ruled by Venus in Aries, which is sitting in the seventh house of the chart. So I kept saying, it's like, it's real, this is very relationally oriented. It's like, how do we maintain our individuality within the framework of these relationships while everyone's sort of moving based on what they feel or their individual beliefs. So it's just, yeah, this is good.
Very.
That makes me really think closely
Mhm.
to something. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying
Oh,
very interesting.
yes. So, I try to, because my bread and butter is mainly in the elemental, I try to use that as the compass, through which I orient, how I view things and my perception. And going back to, like the element of fire, and as we discussed, this whole thing with like hierarchy, there have been experiences where, once you start tuning into the elements, at least as a vibrational frequency, you can start, seeing it. And as astrologers, I always say that astrologers are poised to become the best magicians because they understand the subtleties of these elements better than
mm,
anyone else, right? You understand how these qualitative inputs then become manifestations of like people's personalities or their actions or even mundane events. And
Yeah.
so when you can really hone in on these things, you can start to form a picture and forensically kind of pick apart. There's an experience that I had in Times Square a couple of years ago that I'll never forget, and it was one of the Scientology folks. I don't know if like where's Shelly Miscavige. um there were some of the folks that were proselytizing, trying to get people to join the church and whatnot. And me being who I am, I'm like scanning their kind of like energies and whatnot, and I noticed that there was a concentration of negative fire in the head. Again, the head corresponds to
mm,
fire. It's where our executive faculties are, where we make the decisions and the seat of our will. This is the throne, so to speak.
mm,
And to have your own will subverted by someone else's, it felt like they were literally being compelled to do these things as opposed to like, going across with their innate fire. And so I
mm,
think again, this is a somewhere that the focus will be on, because we are going through both an erasure and a reconstruction, just drawing out the map again of like what do things mean to us. I think another example is like something that I see regularly here in New York City with like politics, when with the rise of Mamdani, when he first came out and like talked about his platform, I was like, all right, this is the guy. We're finally like, moving into a new age of people, coming out and really advocating for themselves and things that they believe to be true, which is still my sentiment. However, there's the whole issue that we have, and I think that this really speaks to that change between, or like that dichotomy between Aries and Pisces, right? This idea of relinquishing our will or the things, our own personal things to the great collective versus, really standing on business 10 toes down for ourselves as an Aries would do, And so there's been this thing where while the impulse and the impact of having a new person come in and challenge the old guard is great, and I think we should all utilize that, again, awaken our inner Aries to really like build off of that and work with these people. We shouldn't be idolizing them, right? Because
100%.
people are still people, and we're humans, we bleed, we're prone
Yeah.
to being more
We were
limited
talking
than.
Yeah, we
Mhm.
were talking about the acolytes of certain, spiritual teachers. It's a little interesting how, people are like, "Oh, I'm a disciple of Paul. Like Paul is the best thing since sliced bread," but we know that Paul was not. So it's so interesting. But oh my God, the way this stuff is coming together, it is so important. I want to know like how you trained up. Like, what were your, without going into your secret recipe, like how did you get to the point where you could like read energy like that?
Mm.
Practice, 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 practice. I will say, we all have different like predispositions, as I'm sure because you're astrologist, so you can see that some folks are more have a propensity for certain skills versus others. And I
Yeah.
think it's really just about having that awareness of it. So me, I'm a very watery and airy person. I have so many planets of water. I got Saturn in Pisces, Mercury in Pisces, um, Jupiter and Pluto in Scorpio. Cancer's
Mm.
empty, but like I've got a lot of that watery nature. So like since I was young, I did have a bit of a knack for, just receiving those sensory inputs. But then at the same time, it was a bit of a weakness because it was overwhelming, right? Like knowing how people
Mhm.
feel
Yeah.
and what's going on with them without them telling and reading into the subtext. But as far as like getting to where I am now, number one was finding out that these things were real and I wasn't just hallucinating. Definitely
Yeah.
helped. And so that's where the cultural factor comes in too, because, you know, in in our background, like that's not exactly like rare, like
Mhm.
when you say that you feel other people's emotions or that you see things, like it's not immediately like, oh, let's get this guy some Prozac, it's actually,
Yeah.
this is like this comes in our lineage. Or at least in the back country, they have all these things, like all these apparitions and things that happen. So it wasn't too outlandish. So one, being able to accept that it was real, and then two, really just trying to quench that thirst for this knowledge. I searched and
Mm.
searched and searched and tried things that were completely BS and then found the kernels of truth that existed within those systems. And so I started on some message boards, just reading and perusing how to unlock your psychic abilities and psionics and things like that. And then from there, I got to the real nitty gritty and started, just learning more about astrology, and esoteric practices. And my bread and butter today, like I said, is kind of like the elemental system, hermeticism, and like just reading like the sources of antiquity that and learning is what I can from that, taking what works, practicing it, and also making it my own, and trying
Mm.
to corroborate. My passion has always been in corroborating this woo woo world with the natural physical world and the scientific rigor that informs us on how things work. And so trying to fuse
Mm.
those two is how I've been able to, and just practice, a whole lot of practice, trying to help people and working on myself. And that's pretty much how I got to where I am today.
It's so
I think
cool.
I think an important thing to highlight from what you just said is because we're talking about spiritual protection. How do we
Hmm.
navigate these new energies coming in? How do we navigate Neptune and Aries? How do we navigate for Saida and I, it's in our eighth house. And so there's been conversation about expansion when it comes to the occult, when it comes to, mediumship, contacting our, the dead, what is really going to happen during this next 14 years. And, that's probably going to be highlighted for, maybe a lot of people, but as we're pushing forward into new territory, whether it's that territory or not, Aries is going to be about taking new territory, right? And then Neptune with the spiritual aspect. But when you're talking about marrying or integrating your spiritual practices with your natural reality, I think that's hard stop for me. That's like, yes, that's one of the things that we need to concentrate on, because if we just live in this sort of psychic space or spiritual headspace, the phrase comes to mind, to be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. And that heavenly mind has to be married to earthly tasks, to earthly goodness, to how we, take care of our own physical body, our environment, this body, how we take care of the planet, how we connect this work to more than just getting into I'm going to just be like me, getting into a dark room with a flashlight and trying to, move some, material around, like move something with our mind. It's not just about, I think of, like, maybe this is out there, but like the Jedi Knights, like they had a role. It wasn't developing themselves for the sake of themselves, just to have power in themselves. And in fact, when you focus only on power to be powerful, you go in the wrong direction as far as spiritual, navigating the spiritual world, and can really get into some dark shit. But focusing on cultivating these things for the good of all. And so it is very individual, but then it becomes collective. And I think that if you can maybe speak to a little bit more to us about, like, what are some practical ways to connect our spiritual practices and what we're doing and what we're learning and all this knowledge that we're trying to absorb and gain. We've got Uranus coming into Gemini. It's just knowledge, seeking knowledge. What do we do? How do we maintain or get into some kind of output? What are some practical things that we can do, not to just be la la loopsy out in psychic la la land, basically?
Absolutely. And well said, and I love this because it really ties everything together. And I'm having a bit of a moment now where I'm like, wow, like I'm here, because that it's extremely, like, everything you're saying is right. How do we ground ourselves? And I think going back to that trace of meaning, right? I've always been that person, absorbing knowledge and just wanting more. And, like, I think to this day, I've developed so many techniques and things and just trying to be creative and finding solutions that eventually I got to the point where I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with all this? And that's where I think Saturn really brings in the key of how to utilize this, in that what good is this power if we're not playing to the essential meaning and the story that we were born to fulfill, in a certain sense, right? I mean, everything is bound by necessity. Like, sure, we can have fanciful thinking, but ultimately reality exists because it was necessary, right? Like, that sounds a little meta, but just in consideration of the fact that we're here for a reason. We're here to commit to a purpose. And while there may be many phantasms or mirror images that might, lead us astray from that core essential meaning of who we are, even that in itself is part of the process, so long as we can reintegrate it. So before I get into the specific means of protection in this time, I think that, at least in my personal reality, like, everything that I experienced, everything that I did learn, ultimately added up to be more than the sum of its parts to bring me to this moment to rise. Like, I'm stepping up as a leader in my community. I'm engaging directly with, like, political individuals and organizations, and really also in the day-to-day, just standing at that line. Like, I've always found comfort, and I don't know if this is my natal Pluto square Saturn or what, but, like, I've always found comfort in those places where nobody else wants to be, kind of like at that borderline. It makes me think of that Sade song, Soldier of Love, at the borderline of my faith and the hinterlands of my devotion. Like, those places where nobody else really steps up to handle things, right? And that's where I found my purpose and my comfort. And where now even all those techniques and all those things that I developed, they're so intrinsic to me that most often I just have to show up and be myself. And it
Mm.
doesn't involve a ritual or a particularly conscious effort. Of course, there's always room for that, but it just flows through naturally. So
Mm.
I think that in terms of like protection and the most important things that we can do now, here's a bit of a cheat code. What I'm about to, offer forth really serves as protection in general and can really form the basis around like just anything that you can do to better yourself. And I think that the best spiritual protection now and forever is the elemental equipoise. And what I mean by
Mm.
that is, again, we have the four elements and their functions. And the polarity, the tetrapolarity between these four things, we look at an equal armed cross. It is in the balancing of these things that we find, protection, improvement, convalescence, healing, like just everything,
Mm.
right? So breaking it down, we have the fire, our will, our decision making, the future, that comes towards us, the vision that is somehow interlinked with causation, right? We have the air, our ability to communicate, to perceive things, to connect to the wider atmosphere of mind and receive ideas and transmit them. We have water that, reflects and really is the more is that middle point between substance, material substance and that more etheric thing, like just quality, right? Our sentiments, the things that flow, the things that change, that break us down and allow us to reconstruct in new ways. And then we have
Mm.
the earth, that substance, that just grounded practicality or action. So, as I'm sure you've seen in all of the natal charts that you've combed through, like these things for better or worse, really just comprise our individuality,
Mm.
and in
Yes.
the same way that we have, like these four directions, then we have the three modalities. We also have the three sections of ourselves: our mind, our emotional self or our astral self, the soul, and then the physical body, right? And
Mm.
so kind of like this might be a different way of like looking at the natal chart and how these forces, again, how the confluence of these forces come in. And so what I mean by elemental equipoise is sort of like the mentality behind like astrological remediation, right? Like
Mhm.
find like, okay, if you're deficient in Sat, in Saturnine traits, how do we build them? How do we work with it without blowing ourselves up, et cetera, et cetera? With the elements, it's very much the same thing. Is if we know that maybe we are lacking in the fire department, we could use more will. Let's
Mm.
find activities, let's find, meditations, let's do things, let's go out, let's run. Let me go be a CEO for a day, at least in
Mm.
the scope of my life, and then start, calling the shots. Let me step up. Let me go square up with somebody real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the air, just opening ourselves up and being more receptive to different ideas. So, the main practice that I followed that really helped me become who I am today was a Czechoslovakian magician named Franz Barden. He wrote Initiation into Hermetics. And that
Mm.
book, I started it when I was like 13. And they say you never really finish it because it's really tough with its exercises and everything. But there's a key exercise in there called the soul mirror. And so the soul mirror is essentially you take two notebooks, you have your black mirror and your white mirror. And what this does is in these notebooks, you reflect the qualities that you find within your soul. So, for example,
Mm.
we can break down and start creating a vocabulary for the elements. And again, this is why I say astrologers are just the best poised to do this work. With fire, let's say, positive qualities are faith, leadership, willpower, power in general, right? The
Courage.
ability to
Mhm.
lead, to
Courage.
see.
Yep.
Mhm. And so, but in these different notebooks, in the white soul mirror, you'll lay down your positive qualities, leadership. In the black soul mirror, you would put down your negative qualities. So, for example, irascibility, if you're easy to like rile up, to get angry, if you're
Mhm.
destructive with your anger, right? The negative qualities of fire, because each element can really give life and, be creative and constructive, but it can also take it and be
Destroy.
destructive, right?
Yeah.
The same way that water gives life when it's flowing and it's all good and fresh and clean, but then once it's all stagnant and gross, it actually starts breaking things down. And so you
Mhm.
can see reflections in each element. And so the point of breaking, separating these things means that you can identify your elemental strengths, whether it's openness to new ideas or empathy or practicality and, hitting those KPIs. And then your negative ones, which are the ones that you really want to focus on first and start deconstructing them, right? So if you know that you're prone to anger and that, you just get riled up easily, how do we then consciously do that process of alchemy, which is the buzzword that everyone loves nowadays, right? How do we take that and then convert it into a positive expression, Maybe that anger should be, put towards the pile of clothes that have, need to get washed and folded in the corner,
That's
right?
good. That is good.
Instead of
Yeah.
our neighbor.
Yeah. I love this. My first workshop, astrology workshop, was alchemizing with astrology because my first astrology teacher taught astrology like this. I wanted a class that was super simple, and this lady delivered because she went straight into the elements. And the first thing we had to do was figure out which elements were like, which ones we were strong in and which ones we didn't have a lot of. And I've like always been a skeptic of all of this. So my mind is just so blown. Mind you, I grew up with with Haitian relatives, but they went away from that. They're, the sort of like the Christianity came in and colonized a lot of the belief systems. This is, and so one of the things I noticed in my chart as an astrologer was I was like, okay, I have a Virgo moon that is not witnessed by its ruler. And I was like, that's so interested. I've been disconnected from my ancestry through these foreign ideas, foreign ways of thinking. And so I was like, okay, so let's troubleshoot this. I call myself a birth chart tactician. I'm like, I'm going to get back to the elements. Because I am strong earth, I was like, let me start grounding my moon. Let me start trying to tap into, because I am air as hell. Like you can probably feel it. It's like if I need to stop myself sometimes, I get so excited about wonderful ideas. So that's why one of the reasons why I'm always like, stop, just ground the feet, drink some water, because I have strong air. Like I can tweet, I can literally write a whole book in one day if I just focused. So I just love this because that is how she taught us astrology, right? And it's like, it was so basic. And it was just like, which is why I love it. It's like astrology helps tap us in to, we don't have to go and spend $9,000 to go to someone's, healing retreat. If that we don't have those resources, we have the ability within our charts to literally just tap into, as you said, what elements what do we need to, what do we have naturally, and what do we need to resource from somewhere else? Okay. So for me, it was water. And it also coincided with I was going into a watery season in my astrology charts. So I was like, bet, let me lean into what this water season is. And it was a mess. Literally, I went from being like CEO power, literally running a practice with a lot of support. Well, actually, not a lot of support, but I digress. Running a practice, quitting my job, and I was like, I'm going to sit and be this and live in this Pisces world and see what that means. And I'm so glad I did because I would not have been able to sustain the life I was living before that. And it all started with looking at the elements. That is so, I love, this is beautiful. I'm going to stop there.
I love what you just said, which was sustain. I wouldn't have been able to sustain because if we are lacking, if you just think about the body, if the body itself is lacking water, which is 70% of what we're made of, right? If the body is lacking power, we are literally electrically charged. Our heart has to have that electric charge. Our brain has to have it. If the body is lacking air, if the body is, the physical, the earth suit is decomposing in any way, what is the next thing that's going to happen? We cannot go without air you can't go without water for more than 3 days. You see what I'm saying? You cease to exist. So the word that came to me when you said that the balancing of the elements was homeostasis. Like, how do we achieve energetic homeostasis? And that's the safe place, because if we get out of balance in any one of those, and it's so basic, but that's really, when I think about spiritual paths and where they should lead us, it gets so complex. And then when you get to this one point of that spiral, it brings you back to the most basic things, and then you see them for how powerfully complex they really are. If we were to sustain ourselves in these days and these times that we live in, this is the path to achieve and to continuously look for that elemental balance. All of the Eastern I just started, like, as soon as you said it, I was like, oh my God, that's the basis of Chinese astrology. It's the basis of Ayurvedic medicine. You just keep going and you can see it, and almost it's just repeated all over the place. This such simple but such profound things, and then returning back to that, returning back to homeostasis, returning back to the breath work, returning back to the body, returning back to the earth, returning back to the mother, returning back to the father. One thing I wanted to ask, because I know we're gonna, your portion is coming to a close soon, is if you could tell us just a little bit about, I know that you're a community leader. I know that you work in politics. I know that you work, in your, with your community, as a mage and as a practitioner. If someone said, wow, I just heard this guy on this podcast, I would love, is there like a way to work with you personally? Do you offer sessions? Do you do any type of, if we're in New York, can we see you in person? Do you do remote work? What can we do to kind of get more of Jeff if we wanted to, experience more of what you have to offer?
Oh, shucks. Well, I'm glad you find it worthy of, looking for. For the most part, I am usually on Threads. That's the only social media that I'm pretty much on, especially like as a mage. Even though I haven't been posting on there lately, I've honestly, most of my work has been going into the community lately, but I do work, and I am building up my website and my platform and everything, and releasing some, products soon. But for the most part, honestly, you can reach out to me easily at saralsu.atelier. That's a mouthful on Threads.
We'll put it in the description box when we post this. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, but I do, after amassing so many different techniques and different just, wisdom, not to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty much open to just about anything. So I really treat everything on a very like a la carte way. But what I'm very passionate about is working with other people that already have their feet wet in a sense in the esoteric, and that they are looking
Yeah.
for more specialized things. So
Mhm.
I'm especially passionate about creating tools, especially for other healers or workers. Talismans are another thing that I really like,
Oh,
just like specialized in, just objects, bringing again, just to tie everything in again, like that confluence of the physical and the inner, right? The esoteric and the exoteric, and just practicality. I'm all about practical things. Like corporate sucks, but it did sharpen my faculties in a lot of ways, and
mhm.
I do think that we should hit those KPIs. Like I'm all about performance. And if you have any of the listeners or anyone interested in working with me has any specific goals that they want to achieve, and even if they don't know necessarily how to articulate them, that's who I'm here for. If you're trying to reach
Mm.
something, if you have a North Star that you're following, that's where I'm most passionate about helping people get back to, those essential meanings of their lives, and whatever that
Mm.
weave, that tapestry that's written and set out for you, like that's where I want to help you become more aligned to, whether that's through my divination services, direct energy or spell work, some healing sessions, or just some objects to kind of like give you a bit more of that boost that you might need. I'm here and happy to serve, and I work on a sliding scale for the most part.
Mhm.
I'm I'm there wherever fate throws me at. So I work with
Mm.
people from all sorts of backgrounds and all kinds of activities.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Does anybody have anything else before Jeff goes back to his day job?
No, I want to thank you so
Wonderful.
much for coming on. It was really inspiring to hear you
Yeah,
speak.
for sure.
Yeah,
Thank
your
you so
Awesome.
much.
your
I'm like,
Aquarius has. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead, Saida.
yeah, I'm like, oh, I should go and meditate more probably because I'm so distracted by everything. I'm not homeostasis.
Yeah, I know. Jeff just gave us about 6 months worth of, he did in 30 minutes. He just gave us 6 months worth of homework. Well, I want to say one more thing before so Jeff has Mercury in Pisces. And I just want to highlight that because so many people hear Mercury in Pisces, Mercury in its detriment. But the eloquence that comes out in it when he just starts to it's not a ramble. It's so eloquent. And all of our placements can be utilized in powerful ways when we get back to the basics. So thank you again for your time and your energy. I feel very infused and inspired. I had chills like 20 times. I was like, this is awesome. So thank you so much.
I'm humbled. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, an absolute pleasure. And if there's anything to take away from this, I would say it's that exactly. Like the rudimentary, the fundamentals, they're simple, they're elegant, and they will carry you through everything that you basically need to get through. And I'm humbled, to have found my speaking to be valuable. Also, shout out to Saturn because it's right conjunct my Mercury, and if it weren't for that,
Yes.
I'd probably be
Yeah. I have a Saturn Mercury conjunction and a Pluto Saturn square, so we have those aspects in common. You guys, Mercury Day, and we had this Mercury and Pisces guest with the Jupiter and Scorpio, all of his water placements, all of his Saturnian discipline of studying all these years, and that was definitely worth the the effort to have him come on. I actually have done an individual session with him, and I know we've talked about this in private, but I wanted to say it for the video too. Jeff spent over 2 hours with me. He did use a divination deck. I can't remember what he called that deck, but it wasn't something I was familiar with. I'd never heard of the deck before. And we went through like basically all the gates of my life and like where everything was at and kind of mapped out where I am and where I want to go. And that's the service. So he did it for me complimentary because he's pioneering this service, but it was a mapping of my life. And we like went through beforehand, we did my challenges, and then we spent 2 hours together. And that session was last summer, and I am still seeing fruit from that session. I can still go back and look at that session and things that he said that were so accurate. The level of accuracy was really, I've spent my life around psychic people, and I can tell you the accuracy is there. And there was a transmission, like there was an energetic exchange that happened when I was sitting with him that was deep. There was a healing. I got some healing about like parenting. I mean, and he's not a parent. I mean, it was just supernatural from beginning to end, really beautiful experience. And I know he's going to be offering that service soon, kind of in a broader sense. But I just want to say, if you guys get a chance to work with him one-on-one, you definitely wouldn't regret it. As far as the two of you, and then anybody that happens to come across this podcast, he would be worth the time and effort. And I told him afterwards, I said, listen, buddy, whatever you charge for this, it would be fine. If you said 300, I'd say it was worth it. If you said 500, I'd say it was worth it. Like whatever number you put on it, I would say it was worth it because it is really. And one of the things we talked about was me getting into more collaborative work, collaborative spaces. And part of that encouragement is one of the reasons why I pushed forward to do a podcast and to want it to be a collaborative podcast. So that's he's one of the reasons why we're here. He helped us along, which is really cool.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Like all of it is awesome. He's just absolutely brilliant. That was just mind blown. I just feel like we had an Aquarius just rush in and just give us so much to work with, which was super practical. And my main takeaway from that is it's just about like the Aries, the conservation. Aries is at its best when it conserves its energy. I think with Aries, what I've learned about the expression of Aries is that it could scatter, but when it's focused, when it's
Mm,
disciplined. And we have Saturn in Aries right now, right? Like giving form to what we're trying to create in our lives using
mm,
something as simple as the elemental equipose and figuring out what that means for us.
hmm.
I'm just like, thank you, Mercury. Thank you,
Yeah,
Saturn. Phenomenal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. So we've come to the end of the 3V POV podcast. Thanks everybody for listening and watching. We'll be back next month around the new moon again. And well, let's see what we're going to talk about then. Bye.